There's a quiet truth about retirement that most people don't fully grasp until they're standing right at the edge of it. It's not just about money. Yes, money matters. It always will. It gives you options, freedom, and a certain level of security. But if you've ever met someone who has all the money in the world and still feels empty, restless, or disconnected, then you already understand this. Financial wealth alone is not enough. A truly successful retirement, the kind that feels fulfilling, peaceful, and meaningful, rests on something deeper. In fact, there are three critical assets that shape the quality of your retirement. And if you can intentionally plan for all three, you're not just preparing to retire, you're preparing to live well in that next chapter. You're preparing for a life that has confidence, purpose, joy, and peace of mind. And if we're being honest, those are the things that really matter because we've all seen the alternative. We've seen people who made it financially, but somehow lost themselves along the way. They have the house, the accounts, the investments, but they don't have fulfillment. They don't have clarity. Sometimes they don't even have strong relationships or a sense of purpose anymore. That's not the goal. That's not the retirement anyone dreams about. At our firm, we've had the privilege of walking alongside many people as they approach and step into retirement. Some transition beautifully. They thrive, they grow, they rediscover themselves. Others struggle even when their finances look solid on paper. And over time, a clear pattern begins to emerge. The difference between those two groups often comes down to how well they've understood and managed these three types of assets. The exercise that changes everything. Let me walk you through something simple, but incredibly revealing. If I asked you right now to take out a pen and paper and write down a list of your assets, what would you put on that list? Most people would immediately start writing things like their 401k, their IRA accounts, their home stocks and bonds, mutual funds, savings accounts. And that makes sense. That's how we've been trained to think. Those are the official assets, the measurable ones, the ones you can assign a dollar value to. Now, let me ask you a second question. What are the most important things in your life? Not the things you own, but the things that truly matter. Take a moment and think about that. For most people, the answers start to shift. Your spouse, your children or grandchildren, your health, your faith, your relationships, your sense of purpose, your ability to think, create, and contribute. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When you compare those two lists, the financial assets list and the most important things list, there's usually very little overlap. And that's not because the second list isn't valuable. It's because we've never been taught to think of those things as assets. But they are. In fact, they may be the most important assets you have. The three types of assets. When you step back and look at your life more holistically, you begin to see that your balance sheet isn't just financial. You actually manage three categories of assets, whether you realize it or not. And understanding this changes everything about how you approach retirement. 1. Financial assets. This is the category we're all familiar with. It includes everything you can measure in dollars, retirement accounts like 401ks and IRAs, investment portfolios, real estate savings business interests. These assets matter. They fund your lifestyle. They provide stability. They allow you to make choices about how you spend your time, but they are only one piece of the picture. And on their own, they are not enough to guarantee a fulfilling retirement. 2. Intellectual assets. This is where things start to expand. Your intellectual assets include your knowledge, your skills, your experiences, your problem-solving ability, your creativity. Think about everything you've learned over the course of your life. Every lesson, every challenge, every success and failure, they've all shaped how you think and how you approach the world. These are assets. And here's something powerful. They don't disappear when you retire. In fact, retirement can be the very season where these assets shine the most. You have the freedom to mentor, to teach, to create, to explore new interests, or even to start something entirely new. Your intellectual assets are what allow you to stay engaged, curious, and mentally alive. 3. Human assets. This is the deepest and most meaningful category. Your human assets include your relationships, your values, your faith or spiritual life, your health, your character, your emotional well-being. These are the assets that shape your identity. They influence how you experience life, not just what you achieve. And in retirement, when the structure of work fades away, these become even more important. Because when you no longer have a job title defining your days, what remains? It's your relationships, your purpose, your inner life. That's what carries you forward. A question that puts it all into perspective. Now, let's take this one step further. Imagine, just for a moment, that you had to make an impossible choice. You can only pass on 2 of these 3 types of assets to the people you love most. You have to let one go. Which 2 would you choose, and which one would you leave behind? When people are asked this question, something fascinating happens. Most don't hesitate for long. They choose to pass on their intellectual assets, their human assets, and they let go of the financial ones. Why? Because deep down, they understand something fundamental. If the people they love have strong values, meaningful relationships, good health, and the ability to think, learn, and adapt, they can rebuild financial wealth. But the reverse isn't necessarily true. You can hand someone money, but if they lack purpose, discipline, or emotional grounding, that wealth can disappear quickly. Or worse, it can leave them feeling just as empty. The real foundation of retirement planning. This is why the most effective retirement plans don't start with numbers. They start with values, because your values determine your direction. They answer questions like, what actually matters to me? How do I want to spend my time? What kind of life do I want to create? What legacy do I want to leave behind? When you're clear on those answers, something powerful happens. Every financial decision becomes easier because now your money has a purpose. It's no longer just about accumulating more. It's about aligning your resources with what truly matters. Growing the assets that matter most. So here's the real question. If these human and intellectual assets are so important, what are you doing to grow them? Because just like financial assets, they require intention. They don't develop automatically. They grow through attention, effort, and consistent investment. You might grow your human assets by spending more intentional time with family, investing in your physical and mental health, strengthening your faith or personal beliefs, building deeper, more meaningful relationships. And you might grow your intellectual assets by learning new skills, reading and staying curious, teaching or mentoring others, exploring creative outlets. These are not side activities. They are core investments in the quality of your life, especially in retirement. Why this matters more than ever. Retirement today is not what it used to be. It's no longer a short, quiet phase at the end of life. For many people, it can last 20, 30, even 40 years. That's not an ending. That's an entirely new chapter. And if you walk into that chapter with only financial preparation, you may find yourself asking, now what? But if you walk into it with strong human and intellectual assets, you don't just retire, you redefine your life. When retirement becomes a question, instead of an answer for decades, most people have viewed retirement as the finish line. You work hard, you save diligently, you make sacrifices along the way, and then one day you arrive. You finally have the freedom to stop working. But here's the part that often catches people off guard. Retirement doesn't automatically come with a sense of direction. In fact, for many, it introduces a new kind of uncertainty. Because when your schedule is no longer dictated by meetings, deadlines, or responsibilities, you're left with a very honest question. What do I do with my time now? And if that question isn't answered intentionally, it can slowly turn into something heavier. A lack of structure can become restlessness. A lack of purpose can become frustration, and over time, that can quietly chip away at the sense of joy you expected to feel. This is exactly why those human and intellectual assets matter so much. They don't just support your retirement, they define the experience of it. The difference between escaping work and moving towards something better. There's a subtle but important shift in mindset that separates a fulfilling retirement from an empty one. Some people spend their working years focused on escape. They think, I just need to get out of this job. I can't wait until I don't have to do this anymore. And while that feeling is understandable, it creates a problem. Because when you're only focused on what you're leaving behind, you never fully define what you're moving toward. And retirement, by its nature, creates space, a lot of space. So the question becomes, what fills that space? This is where your intellectual and human assets step in. They give you direction. They give you something to move toward, not just something to move away from. A story that illustrates the point. We once worked with someone, I'll call him David. David had done everything right financially. He saved consistently, invested wisely, and entered retirement with more than enough to support his lifestyle. On paper, it was a perfect plan. But about 6 months into retirement, something shifted. He started to feel off, not because of money. That part was solid, but because he had lost a sense of identity. For years, he had been known as the problem solver, the leader, the one people turned to for answers. His work gave him a sense of purpose, even if he didn't always realize it at the time. And when that role disappeared, it left a gap. What changed things for him wasn't a financial adjustment. It was a shift back toward his other assets. He began mentoring younger professionals. He reconnected with interests he had set aside years ago. He invested more time into relationships that had been overshadowed by his career. And slowly, something powerful happened. He didn't just adjust to retirement, he re-engaged with life. Why purpose isn't optional. There's a misconception that retirement is about relaxation. And yes, rest is important. Slowing down can be healthy. But a life built entirely around relaxation tends to lose its meaning over time. Human beings are wired for contribution. We're wired to grow, to connect, to create, to give. And when those elements are missing, something feels incomplete. This is why purpose isn't just a nice idea, it's essential. It's the anchor that keeps your days meaningful. It's what turns time into something valuable instead of something to simply pass. Bringing it back to your plan. So how does all of this connect back to retirement planning? It changes where you start. Instead of asking, how much do I need to retire? You begin by asking, what kind of life do I want to live? What matters most to me? How do I want to spend my time and energy? Those answers become your foundation. And from there, your financial plan becomes a tool to support that vision, not the other way around. A simple framework you can use. If you want to begin applying this in your own life, here's a simple way to think about it. Start with 3 reflections. 1, clarify your values, human assets. What truly matters to you? Not what sounds good, not what others expect, but what genuinely feels important in your life right now. Is it family, faith, health, freedom, contribution? Be honest here, because this becomes your compass. 2, identify your strengths and interests, intellectual assets. What are you naturally good at? What do people often come to you for? What activities make you feel engaged and energized? These are clues to how you might continue to grow and contribute in retirement. 3, align your resources, financial assets. Now, and only now, bring your financial assets into the picture. Ask yourself, how can my financial resources support the life I've just defined? This is where planning becomes powerful, because now your investments, your withdrawals, your strategies, they all serve a clear purpose. The hidden opportunity in retirement. There's something incredibly freeing about this stage of life. For the first time in decades, your time can truly become your own. not dictated by necessity, but shaped by intention. And that creates an opportunity that many people underestimate, an opportunity to reconnect with what matters most, rediscover parts of yourself that were set aside, build deeper relationships, contribute in ways that feel meaningful, create a life that feels aligned, not just successful on paper. But again, that doesn't happen automatically. It happens when you recognize and invest in all three types of assets. A question worth sitting with. Before we wrap this up, I want to leave you with something to think about. If your financial assets were taken care of, completely handled, what would you focus on next? How would you spend your days? Who would you spend them with? What would give your life meaning? Your answers to those questions are not hypothetical. They're a glimpse into what your retirement could and should be built around, bringing it full circle. At the end of the day, a successful retirement isn't just about reaching a number, it's about creating a life where your finances support you but don't define you, a life where you feel connected, engaged, and at peace, a life where you wake up with a sense of purpose, not just a lack of obligation. And that kind of retirement is built on three things: financial strength, intellectual growth, human connection, and values. When all three are working together, something powerful happens. You don't just retire with confidence, you retire with clarity, with intention, with a sense of fulfillment that goes far beyond money. If this perspective resonated with you, it might be worth taking the next step, whether that's reflecting more deeply on your values, having a conversation about your plan, or simply starting to think differently about what retirement means to you. Because the earlier you begin aligning these three assets, the more meaningful your future becomes. And if you found this helpful, take it as a sign to keep going. There's more to explore, more to refine, and more to build, because retirement isn't the end of your story. In many ways, it's where the most meaningful chapters begin.